Eleanor Vance stopped believing in sentimental notions 2 decades ago. 20 years as a park ranger taught her the wilderness offered cold indifference, and a private tragedy cemented that view within her own heart. Everything changed on one night following a historic flood. She found Rudra, a starving lion cub, near death. She brought him home out of duty, not affection. Yet her only companion, the notoriously territorial Siamese cat, Shiva, looked at the wild cub with a mother's eyes. This impossible bond dragged Ellie out of her emotional ravine, forcing her into the ultimate fight, against the law, against nature's own design, and finally forcing her to embrace profound loss to find true freedom. Eleanor Vance, known simply as Ellie to the few who still bothered, drove the battered, olive-green pickup through a swamp of drying mud and broken cypress knees. The floods of the previous month had retreated, leaving behind a landscape that mirrored her own emotional state, devastated, silent, and littered with debris. The sun was sharp, the air thick with the smell of decay, but Ellie felt none of it. Her mind, like the heavy-duty tires on her truck, was designed only for traction, for moving forward without feeling the ground beneath. Ellie had been a ranger for 20 years, a lifespan that had taught her that sentimentality was a liability. She had seen too much: the needless death, the slow, cruel indifference of nature, and the irreversible damage done by humans. The worst damage, however, she carried internally. 10 years ago, a rushed rescue operation had cost her more than just her faith in happy endings. It had cost her child. Since then, her job had become a shield, her cynicism a necessary armor. At home, her only companion was Shiva, a Siamese cat of formidable temperament and razor-sharp intellect. Shiva was a creature of fierce, almost proprietary devotion to Ellie, and equally fierce disdain for everything else. Their relationship was one of mutual, unspoken understanding: silence, routine, and zero emotional expectations. That afternoon, she was tasked with checking a remote ravine, notorious for trapping flood victims, both human and animal. As she picked her way around a cluster of felled oaks, she noticed something small and still, partially submerged in the brackish water. It was a lion cub, barely 3 weeks old, its fur matted with mud, its breathing shallow. One tiny paw was scraped raw. It was clearly abandoned, a victim of the flash flood that had swept its mother away, or simply left to die. Ellie's first professional thought was clinical: a weak specimen. Contact the rehabilitation center. She reached for the radio but paused. The cub, which she would later name Rudra, didn't move. Its eyes, still adjusting to the light, held a glassy, hopeless quality that, for a fleeting, dangerous second, reminded Ellie of the last look in her daughter's eyes. Shaking the memory off, she acted on pure reflex, born not of emotion, but of duty, to minimize suffering. She gently wrapped Rudra in a spare thermal blanket and placed him in a crate in the truck's passenger seat. The trip back was quiet, broken only by Shiva's low, rumbling protest from the window ledge as they pulled into the driveway. Ellie set the crate down in her makeshift quarantine area, the laundry room, and left to prepare a sterile environment and call the center. When she returned, she found the scene was already altered. Shiva, who routinely shredded any unwanted visitor, stood frozen at the doorway, tail twitching in agitation. The lion cub, stirring weakly, let out a tiny, high-pitched mewl. Shiva approached the crate with the practiced menace of a predator, its blue eyes narrowed to slits. Ellie braced herself, ready to grab the cat and prevent the inevitable territorial skirmish. But Shiva did not strike. The Siamese jumped onto the crate, peered down at the helpless Rudra, and then let out a sound Ellie hadn't heard in the 10 years they had lived together, a deep, continuous, throbbing purr. Slowly, deliberately, Shiva lowered its head through the wire mesh, reached out a paw, and began to groom Rudra's matted coat. It was an act of unexpected, fierce maternal instinct. Ellie watched, motionless, the phone slipping from her numb fingers, the sterile plan in her mind dissolving into warm, messy, impossible reality. She couldn't call the center now, not yet. The sterile plan in Eleanor Vance's mind had not just dissolved. It had been shredded by the silent, rhythmic purr of a 30-pound Siamese cat. Ellie didn't call the center that night. She watched, instead, the spectacle of Shiva adopting Rudra. The cub, still weak, instinctively nestled against the warmth of the cat's sleek body, and Shiva, the fiercely solitary creature, accepted the weight without protest. It was a bizarre, fundamental shift in the natural order, happening right there on her laundry room floor. For the next few weeks, Ellie lived a secret life. Her routine patrols continued, her professional face remaining a mask of detached competence, but her home life had become unrecognizable. The laundry room, a space previously reserved for cold, mechanical tasks, was now a den of improbable maternity. Shiva became Rudra's relentless caregiver. The cat would groom the cub for hours, its sandpaper tongue cleaning the matted fur and licking Rudra's injured paw until the scab tightened and healed. Rudra, in turn, treated Shiva as his mother, following the smaller animal's every move, mirroring the cat's low growls, and attempting clumsily to mimic its stealthy gait. Ellie found herself developing routines she had shed years ago. She was measuring formula, sterilizing bottles, and performing nighttime checks not out of duty, but out of a subtle, almost forgotten sense of nurturing. She had to manage both animals. Shiva would aggressively swat away the bottle if Ellie didn't warm the ewe. Formula to precisely the right temperature, a tiny tyrant enforcing the rules of motherhood. This strange shared project created a slow thaw in Ellie. She started finding humor in the absurdity. Rudra, already outweighing the cat, trying to hide behind Shiva during a loud thunderstorm, or the cat teaching the cub how to stalk a dangling feather with theatrical seriousness. There were moments of pure, unfiltered peace, the low, combined ASMR of Shiva's throbbing purr and Rudra's soft suckling, moments Ellie would capture on her phone, then instantly delete, afraid of the emotional paper trail. She laughed, a sound so alien and rusty that Shiva looked up, briefly breaking character before returning to its maternal duties. The walls Ellie had built around her heart, the cynical armor, were developing hairline cracks, not from assault, but from the gentle, persistent pressure of watching impossible love unfold. But the impossible love was running headlong into the inevitable law. Rudra was growing with the frightening speed of a wild animal. The sweet, floppy cub was now a muscular, disproportionately large animal with developing claws. The games that were cute a week ago were now destructive. He was chewing through the baseboards and testing his burgeoning roar, which sounded less like a kitten and more like a distant, gravelly earthquake. The situation came to a head on a deceptively sunny Tuesday. Ellie was startled by a knock at the front door. Standing there, clipboard in hand and a familiar, weary expression on his face, was Ranger John Davies, the chief warden and a friend who knew too much about her past. "Ellie, I haven't seen you file your mandatory post-flood inventory report," John said, his voice flat but carrying the weight of authority. "I figured I'd drop by and make sure everything was in order." Ellie's stomach dropped. John was meticulous, sharp, and crucially a stickler for the regulations. He had been a pallbearer at her child's funeral. He was the physical manifestation of the duty she had just abandoned. "Everything's fine, John. Just tied up," Ellie replied, trying to block the hallway with her body. "I'm sure you are," John said, his gaze fixed over her shoulder. He didn't need to ask. The low, resonant thump from the laundry room, followed by Shiva's irritated hiss and a subsequent happy lion-cub squeak, made the inventory report redundant. John pushed past her, moving directly to the laundry room door. He didn't have to open it wide to see the impossible tableau, the lion cub, now the size of a large beagle, draped comfortably across the chest of the tiny Siamese cat. John stared, not with anger, but with a profound disappointment that cut Ellie deeper than any shouted reprimand. "Eleanor," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous low tone, "you know the rules. You know the history. You know what these animals become. You're bringing a Class A predator into a residential zone. This isn't healing. It's denial." He pointed a finger at Rudra, who blinked lazily up at the intruder. "That animal is a ticking clock, Ellie. I'm giving you 2 weeks. 2 weeks to make the arrangements to transfer him to the nearest authorized facility. Not an hour more. If you don't comply, I won't just file a report. I'll have to involve the state authorities, and that means he goes to the first zoo that has a vacancy." The threat hung in the air. The lion cub's destiny was not the wild, but a sterile cage, all because of her mistake. The happy bubble had burst. The impossible law had met the unyielding reality of the law of man. Rudra's existence, once a source of quiet joy, was now a countdown to a devastating choice. The 2-week deadline imposed by John Davies didn't slow Rudra's growth. It amplified the ticking of the biological clock. The lion cub was no longer a fluffy, cuddly companion. He was a creature of immense, burgeoning power, nearly 70 pounds, with paws the size of Ellie's open hands. Rudra had developed a clumsy, booming sense of play. The joyous spectacle of activity was rapidly transforming into a dangerous liability. Ellie's house, once a fortress of solitude, was becoming a ruin. Floorboards were scratched, the sofa cushions disemboweled, and the makeshift barricade around the kitchen was routinely breached. The chaos was external, but the real damage was internal. Ellie was terrified of the impending loss, trying to cram months of affection into 2 frantic weeks. She had to manage her love while constantly asserting her dominance to keep the predator instinct in check. The climax of the domestic drama arrived one humid afternoon. Rudra, emboldened by his size, initiated a game of chase. Shiva, who had been resting near the hearth, joined the pursuit, trying to maintain the illusion of control. But Rudra's movements were no longer the gentle, wobbly pounces of a cub. During a mock attack, the lion cub's back legs gave way, and he stumbled hard, his enormous developing paw raking across Shiva's flank. A sound ripped through the quiet house, not the playful hiss of Shiva, but a sharp, panicked shriek of pain. Rudra immediately backed away, confused and whimpering, sensing the gravity of his mistake. Shiva limped into a corner, shaking, a thin, bright line of blood appearing on its pristine white fur. Ellie rushed to the cat, her hands shaking, adrenaline flooding her system. The sight of blood, the fear in Shiva's usually fearless blue eyes, was the sharpest wake-up call yet. The cat, her fierce companion, was genuinely terrified and retreating from the animal it had adopted. The bond, once unbreakable, was being fractured by the unyielding force of Rudra's true nature. "This isn't healing, Ellie. This is denial," John's words echoed in her mind, amplified by the sight of Shiva trembling. Ellie knew then, with devastating certainty, that she had prioritized her own emotional recovery over Rudra's future. And Shiva's safety. She cleaned and dressed Shiva's wound, feeling a crushing weight of guilt. She had failed both of them. The moment of crisis quickly escalated into the main external conflict. That evening, as Ellie sat despairing, her work radio crackled to life. A wildfire, fueled by the dry underbrush left by the flood, had erupted near the main wildlife corridor, far closer to her location than anticipated. John's voice, tight with urgency, came over the receiver. "Ellie, get moving. The fire containment team needs access to the old logging road behind your property. I need you to secure your perimeter immediately. And listen to me. Since we can't risk transport through the main highway with the evacuees, you need to drive Rudra to the temporary holding facility near the old quarry. Now. No excuses." Ellie packed the cub, the process a mournful rehearsal for the final separation. Rudra whined, confused by the turmoil and the smell of smoke creeping into the air. Shiva watched from the corner, refusing to approach the lion cub, a silent, painful confirmation of the break. Under the orange-tinted sky, Ellie and John drove separate trucks toward the quarry. The air was thick and oppressive, mirroring the pressure in Ellie's chest. "John, the quarry facility is meant for ungulates, not big cats. It's temporary, right? We'll take him to the full rehab center once the fire is contained," Ellie pleaded, gripping the steering wheel. John looked over, his face hardened by the glow of the distant flames. "Eleanor, be realistic. Rudra is getting too big, too fast. We can't risk him escaping or causing a panic. I've already contacted the State Wildlife Board. They have a pre-approved transfer agreement with the Dallas Zoo. They need a young male for their breeding program. It's safe, it's secure, and it solves our problem permanently." The words hit Ellie like a physical blow. The Dallas Zoo. Not freedom, not the wild, but a lifetime sentence of confinement. John wasn't offering salvation. He was offering a clean, regulatory solution that would strip Rudra of his fundamental identity. "You promised," Ellie choked out. "You said rehab." "I said authorized facility," John countered, his voice sharp with finality. "This is the only way to protect you and to protect the integrity of the reserve. You broke the law, Eleanor. Now we deal with the consequences." They arrived at the temporary holding area. The small, sterile cage felt like a prison cell. Ellie wrestled Rudra into the enclosure. The cub, sensing the change in her demeanor and the new, frightening confinement, let out his biggest roar yet. A sound that was pure, raw wilderness, echoing off the metal walls. Ellie slumped against the cold bars, watching Rudra pace frantically. She had saved him from the flood only to deliver him to a cage. She had opened her heart to him, only to have that love lead to his ultimate imprisonment. Rudra looked at her, his big eyes wide and desperate, a question in them that she couldn't answer. The darkness was absolute. The metallic clang of the cage at the quarry facility echoed the iron grip of despair on Ellie's heart. Dallas Zoo. That phrase was a death sentence for the wild spirit Shiva had nurtured. She looked at Rudra, his pacing frantic, his wild eyes pleading. In that moment, the cynicism that had protected her for 10 years crumbled. She realized that John was offering safety, but safety at the cost of identity. The cage was a failure of her duty, a betrayal of the cub's nature. Under the cover of darkness and the smoke haze from the distant fire, Ellie made her choice. It was the riskiest, most rebellious act of her professional career. She quietly opened the temporary holding gate, sedated Rudra just enough for transport, and loaded him back into the pickup. She knew the consequences if John found out, the end of her career, possibly legal action. But the risk was irrelevant compared to Rudra's fate. Back at the house, she collected Shiva. The cat, still favoring its side, looked at her with an uncanny intelligence. Ellie placed Shiva into a small carrier. "This is it, old friend," she whispered, her voice thick. "We're giving him his chance." She drove far past the fire lines, past the main reserve boundaries, toward a lesser-known valley. A remote, well-watered corridor she had discovered years ago, leading directly into a vast, protected wilderness area. This was the final test, the place where love had to become letting go. Ellie carefully opened the transport crate. Rudra, groggy but sensing the freedom of the open air, hesitated. He was still half tame, bonded to the human scent and the cat's warmth. Ellie knew he needed a catalyst, a final push from the heart he trusted most. She unlatched Shiva's carrier. The Siamese stepped out, stiff-legged, and walked directly to Rudra. The lion cub lowered his huge head, nudging the cat gently. Shiva didn't purr. Instead, the cat performed an ancient, final ritual. It stretched up and placed its paws firmly on Rudra's shoulders, then gave his forehead a sharp, almost authoritative lick. It was a silent, powerful gesture, a final blessing, a handover. Rudra understood. He rubbed against Shiva one last time, a moment of devastating silence in the wilderness. Ellie stepped back, tears finally streaming down her face. She closed her eyes, preparing to watch the cub turn and walk away. That's when it happened. Not the expected whimper of hesitation, but a deep, rolling roar, raw and primal, cut through the night. It wasn't Rudra's clumsy yell, it was the sound of a full-grown, dominant male lion echoing from the ridge across the valley, a sound of family, of belonging. Rudra's head snapped up. His eyes, for the first time, lost their domesticated confusion and ignited with the fire of instinct. He looked back at Ellie and Shiva, not with pleading but recognition, then turned and bolted, running straight toward the sound of his own kind, dissolving into the dense shadows. Ellie stood motionless, holding Shiva tightly as the cub disappeared. She had not only set him free, she had delivered him to his heritage. 1 year later. Ellie still worked at the reserve, but her office was cleaner, her uniform pressed. She received an official reprimand from the state board, thanks to John's cover-up, but no termination. John, who had silently backed her risky move, had ensured the paper trail disappeared. Her relationship with the wilderness had softened. She was still a ranger, but she was now a protector, not just an observer. On her left forearm, visible when she rolled up her sleeves, was a small, delicate tattoo, the silhouette of a Siamese cat curling around a sleeping lion cub. The film closes with Ellie on patrol, using long-range binoculars. She spots a small pride of lions near the valley corridor. Among them is a magnificent young male, strong and healthy. As he lets out a confident, earth-shaking roar, Ellie lowers the binoculars, a quiet smile settling on her face. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Before you scroll away, tell me this. Do you believe a bond like theirs could really exist? If this story touched your heart, drop a 1 in the comments so I know you're still with me. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might just remind you that sometimes the wild loves us back in ways we'll never forget.